The rain fell in a relentless drizzle, streaking down the grimy windowpane of Dr. Michael Harper's small apartment. The dim glow of a flickering street lamp outside barely illuminated the room cluttered with textbooks, half-empty coffee cups, and scattered photographs. It was well past midnight, but sleep remained elusive. Michael sat hunched over his worn desk, fingers trembling slightly as he stared at the old black and white photograph pinned to the corkboard. A haunting image, his daughter, Emily, suspended by a noose, eyes wide open in frozen terror. The sight should have shattered him, but instead, an involuntary, chilling laugh escaped his lips. He rubbed his eyes, wondering how something so grotesque could provoke such a reaction. The tension coiled tight inside him like a poisonous serpent, twisting every thought, every memory. Michael was a man trained to understand the darkest corners of the human mind, yet nothing had prepared him for this. 2 years ago, his wife had vanished from their lives without warning, leaving behind nothing but a note and a trail of shattered promises. She had chosen another man, abandoning Michael and their daughter to a world of cold silence and creeping dread. Since then, Michael had poured himself into his work, counseling troubled minds, untangling the webs of fear and madness. But the greatest mystery remained locked inside his own home. Emily's sudden descent into darkness, the slow crumbling of her spirit that he had failed to stop. The photograph had appeared mysteriously on his desk the morning after Emily's death. A grim memento, a puzzle piece he couldn't place. Who took it? Why? And why had it unleashed something deep within him? Something unexplainable. Michael's breaths came shallow and quick. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist around him, whispering secrets that his logical mind refused to hear. Tonight, the house felt different, cold, alive, watching, and somewhere in the silence, beyond reason or sanity, a man laughed. Michael hardly remembered the last time Emily smiled genuinely. It was like watching a fragile flower slowly wither under an unrelenting frost. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The bright, curious girl who once filled their apartment with laughter and warmth had slowly retreated into silence. He noticed the changes little by little, the way she stopped answering his calls, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the nights she spent locked in her room. At first, he told himself it was just teenage angst, a phase every parent feared but endured. But deep down, he knew something was wrong, something far worse. Emily had been a bright student, always eager to learn, but her grades had slipped suddenly and inexplicably. Teachers sent worried emails mentioning her withdrawn behavior and lack of focus. Her once tight circle of friends seemed to dissolve overnight, replaced by long hours spent alone online. Michael's nights became restless as he haunted her room after she fell asleep, watching the empty bed, the scattered journals she never spoke about. One night, he found a notebook hidden beneath her mattress. The pages were filled with dark, chaotic scribbles, words of despair, loneliness, and fear, names of people he didn't know, places she never talked about. He confronted her gently, but Emily only looked at him with hollow eyes, as if she were a stranger trapped inside her own body. She whispered about voices that told her she was worthless, that the world would be better off without her. Michael's heart broke each time she said it, but he felt powerless to help. His work as a psychologist offered no refuge. He understood mental illness in theory, had helped countless patients battle demons like these, yet he could not save his own daughter from slipping away. The tension at home grew unbearable. One evening, after a rare outburst, Emily slammed the door and didn't come out for hours. Michael sat alone, staring at the door, praying she would come back to him. When she finally emerged, her face was pale, eyes distant. She handed him a small envelope and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." Inside there was a photo, an old, smiling picture of them together, the happiest moment he could remember. But folded beneath it was a note, written in shaky handwriting. "I'm tired. Please forgive me." Michael's world tilted. He felt a cold wave of dread roll over him, crushing the fragile hope he had clung to for so long. The house grew colder, darker, as if Emily's fading spirit had sucked the warmth from every corner. That night, Michael found himself unable to sleep. He stared at the ceiling, haunted by the echo of her words, the silent screams of a girl trapped in her own mind. The line between his professional detachment and personal agony blurred. Every patient he'd comforted seemed to stare back at him, accusing. The next morning, Emily was gone. The apartment was silent, unnaturally so, a kind of silence that didn't invite peace but suffocated every breath. Michael had woken up to a heavy stillness, the kind that seemed to press against his chest. The sun hadn't yet risen and the sky outside was a dull, indifferent gray. He waited for the familiar creak of Emily's door, the light footsteps as she made her way to the bathroom, but nothing came. Something was wrong. He felt it before he knew it. A primal instinct, a surge of dread. "Emily," he called, his voice trembling with a fear he couldn't name. He knocked on her door once, twice, no answer. He turned the knob. The door opened with a reluctant groan. Her room was dim, the curtains drawn, her phone still charging on the nightstand. Her bed was perfectly made, untouched. And in the far corner, just beyond the edge of the window's light, something swayed. At first, his mind rejected the image. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. Then reality sank its claws in. Emily, hanging, her lifeless body swayed ever so slightly, as if mocking time itself. Her face pale and bloated, her eyes half open. The same eyes that once sparkled with curiosity now stared blankly past him. Michael fell to his knees. A sound escaped from his throat. Not a scream, not a cry, but a guttural, broken thing. The sound of a soul tearing in half. He crawled toward her, hands shaking uncontrollably as he tried to lift her. The rope bit into his palms. Her skin was cold, too cold. His breath came in ragged sobs as he cradled her against his chest, the stool she had kicked away lying on its side like a silent witness. No, 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 no. He rocked back and forth, her weight limp in his arms. Time became meaningless. There was no morning, no tomorrow, only this, a moment frozen in grief. He whispered her name again and again as if saying it would bring her back. But she was gone. The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, uniforms, and paperwork. People spoke to him, officers, paramedics, neighbors. But their words were distant, hollow echoes. He couldn't process them, couldn't comprehend that this was real, that she was truly gone. When they took her body away, he stood at the doorway like a man sleepwalking through a nightmare. It was raining again. The city felt cruel in its indifference, and Michael, the man who had helped others navigate grief, trauma, depression, found himself drowning in it, alone. utterly alone. He returned to her room that evening, untouched since the morning. Everything was still in place. The scent of her shampoo lingered faintly in the air. Her favorite sweater lay folded at the foot of her bed. Her journals were stacked neatly on the shelf. Journals he had once read, but now couldn't bear to open. Michael sank onto her bed, gripping a pillow as if it were her. His tears came in waves, choking, violent sobs that made his whole body shake. He had missed the signs. He knew better. He had studied these symptoms, written papers about them, lectured students about prevention, and yet he had failed his own daughter. Guilt wrapped around him like a second skin. Every memory became a weapon. Her silence at dinner. The cuts on her wrist she claimed were from the cat. The nights she cried in the bathroom and turned on the faucet to hide the sound. He had rationalized. He had wanted to believe she was just adjusting, that she was strong, that he had time. But he hadn't. She had slipped through his fingers like smoke, and now all that remained was the unbearable weight of regret. That night, he didn't sleep. Couldn't. He sat in the dark with a glass of untouched whiskey, listening to the echo of her voice in his head. "I'm sorry, Dad." The words stabbed deeper than any knife, not because she had left, but because she believed she had to apologize, that she was the burden. He whispered into the darkness, "It's me who should be sorry, Emily, not you." The rain tapped at the windows, soft but relentless. Outside, the world went on. But inside the Harper apartment, time had stopped, and in the silence, Michael began to unravel. 3 days after Emily's death, the apartment had become a mausoleum of memories. Michael hadn't left. He hadn't eaten. The funeral had been brief, painfully quiet. Closed casket, rainfall, condolences that felt like needles pressing into his skull. He returned to the apartment alone that evening. The walls too quiet, the air thick like a soaked rag. Every room breathed her absence. Her scent was fading, as if even the ghosts of her presence had begun to abandon him. Then, on the 4th morning, he found the photograph. It lay flat on his desk, placed deliberately directly on top of his leather-bound notebook, the very spot he always left his morning coffee. He hadn't seen it the night before. Michael froze. It was a photo of Emily, but not from her life. It was from her death. She was hanging again, just like the day he found her. Same clothes, same position, only one thing was different: her eyes. In this photo, her eyes were wide open, staring directly into the camera, into him. There was a twisted half-smile on her face. Not peaceful, not tragic, but mocking. It was impossible. The police had taken no such photos, and he certainly hadn't. No one had entered the apartment, no signs of a break-in, yet the photo was there. Real, tangible, cold to the touch. He felt something crack deep inside. His hands trembled as he held the image. His mind, trained to dissect trauma and hallucination, suddenly couldn't trust itself. "This isn't real," he whispered, but even as he said it, he knew it was. The photo was grainy but vivid, soaked with an energy that made his skin crawl. He checked the windows, locked, the doors, locked. The clock ticked too loudly, the refrigerator hummed too low. The air was wrong. That night, he burned the photo in the kitchen sink, watched the flame twist and devour Emily's face. Black smoke curled upward like a whisper. But when he returned to his study the next morning, the photo was back. Same position, same eyes. But now, there was something written on the bottom. In red, shaky handwriting, "Did you watch me die, Dad?" Michael staggered backward, knocking over a chair. His heart thundered in his chest. He picked up the photo again and tore it in half. Then again, 16 pieces. He flushed them down the toilet. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the couch, staring at the wall, clutching a glass of whiskey that never reached his lips. Every so often, he would glance toward her bedroom door. He kept it closed now, but it wasn't just the photo. The house had started whispering. At first, it was subtle. A creak in the floorboards, a soft hum at 3 a.m. Then came the footsteps. Light, hesitant, moving from her room to the hallway. A quiet knock on his door. "Dad!" Michael sat bolt upright when he first heard it. A girl's voice. Barely a whisper. He opened the door. Nothing. He stood in the hallway, heart racing, listening to the silence breathe. Then came the crying, faint sobs from her room, exactly like the ones he had ignored so many nights before, and worse still. Sometimes he laughed without knowing why. Sometimes he would catch his own reflection in the mirror, smiling when he shouldn't be. A cold, inappropriate smile, a therapist's detachment twisted into something darker. Was he losing his mind? Was guilt devouring him? Or was Emily not done? By the end of the week, Michael stopped going outside. The windows were covered. The lights rarely turned on. He spoke to himself, to her, sometimes reasoning, sometimes pleading. He told himself he was grieving, but in the cracks of his voice, there was a different tone, terror. And in the drawer beside his bed, the photo appeared once more, whole, unburnt, unshredded. This time, her eyes were gone. Only 2 dark holes remained, leaking something black. Michael sat motionless in his darkened study, the photograph clenched in his hand like a curse he couldn't let go of. The shadows in the apartment had grown longer, even in daylight, and time felt like a thing that twisted rather than moved. He turned to the shelf behind him and pulled out the black box, the home security DVR. Months ago, Emily had asked him to install cameras after a minor break-in happened in their apartment complex. He had begrudgingly done it, thinking it excessive. Now it was the only window to a past he had ignored. He connected the system to his laptop, eyes bloodshot, breath uneven. The screen flickered to life. He selected the week before her death. Each camera came into view: the hallway, the living room, the front door, and Emily's bedroom. Michael hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted to see what it had recorded, but something inside him, guilt, grief, maybe madness, pushed him forward. He pressed play. At first, there was nothing, just ordinary moments. Emily brushing her hair, sitting at her desk, reading, quiet, too quiet. Michael watched hours pass. In minutes, she barely left her room. Sometimes she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor for an hour at a time, motionless. On Tuesday, the footage showed her standing in front of the mirror, pulling up her sleeves. Scars, fresh, old, some bandaged, some bleeding. Michael flinched. He hadn't noticed, not once. She had worn long sleeves every day, even during summer. He watched her cry, not sob, not scream, just silent tears falling as she clutched her pillow. He paused the video, his own face reflected on the screen, hollow, broken, and monstrous. He had been 10 feet away, working in the study, writing a chapter on adolescent anxiety. He hadn't knocked on her door. On Wednesday, she had paced the hallway for nearly an hour, holding her phone, typing and deleting messages. One time she approached his door, hand raised, hesitating. She never knocked. She walked away. Michael screamed into his hands. The memory played in sync with his own timeline. That night, he had been on a late-night Zoom session with a client, a celebrity dealing with burnout. He had muted Emily's knock without even knowing it. Thursday, 3:12 a.m. He paused the screen. The date, the day she died. He watched her enter her room, calm but pale. She sat on her bed, took out a small notebook, wrote something. Then she opened her closet, removed a rope. Michael leaned in, breath frozen. She looked directly at the camera, and for the first time in the footage, she smiled. Not happily, but like someone who had made peace with the unbearable. Then she stood on the stool, looped the rope, paused, and whispered something. The camera didn't pick up audio, but her lips moved, slowly, deliberately. Michael pressed pause, rewound, zoomed in. She said, "Goodbye, Dad. I know you're busy." Michael collapsed to the floor, his heart twisted into something cruel and alien. No scream came out, just a long, shuddering exhale, a breath that carried 1,000 knives. He had missed it all, the warning signs, the pain, the silent pleas for help. He was a man trained to read minds, to save people from the darkness, but he couldn't save the one person he loved most. He watched the rest of the footage like a man forced to witness his own execution. The moment her body dropped, the swing, the stillness, and then something he couldn't explain. Exactly 7 minutes after her death, the camera in her room glitched. Static. Then her face again, close up, eye contact, but it was impossible. The camera was mounted in the corner, and yet her face filled the screen, pale, blood running from her eyes, and that same eerie smile. She mouthed something new this time. Michael froze the screen, rewound, zoomed in. "Why didn't you look at me?" Michael slammed the laptop shut, breathing raggedly. He felt the walls lean inward. The lights flickered overhead. He was breaking, and the house knew it, because from the hallway he heard her bedroom door creak open, and this time there were no footsteps, only the unmistakable sound of a rope tightening. Michael stood in the dark hallway, staring at the slightly open door to Emily's room. He hadn't touched that door since the day they took her body away. He hadn't dared, but now the door was open, just a crack, as if something inside had been waiting. He pushed it gently. The hinges groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. Books stacked neatly, the curtains drawn, a sweater still draped over the chair. The faint scent of lavender still lingered, so faint it felt like memory more than fragrance. But then, the temperature dropped. It wasn't a natural cold. It was wet, biting like the air just before a thunderstorm. And then he saw it. The stool, the rope, Emily. Again. She stood beneath the ceiling beam, rope in hand, eyes heavy with sorrow. Her body flickered faintly, like a projection through fog. Michael gasped, stepping backward, but didn't run. He couldn't. This was the moment he hadn't been there. She climbed the stool, looped the rope, paused, whispered, "Goodbye, Dad. I know you're busy." Her voice echoed in the room, but not from her mouth. It echoed from the walls. Michael cried out, "No! Stop! Emily, stop!" But she couldn't hear him. She never could. She stepped off. The body dropped. Michael screamed, and then everything reset. The stool was back. Emily was back. The rope unwound itself like a snake recoiling from prey. She stood again, tired and pale, and it began again. Step, loop, pause, whisper, drop. Michael collapsed to his knees, sobbing. He tried crawling to her, but the air thickened like molasses, like drowning. His limbs moved as if trapped in mud. He shouted again. Nothing changed. Again and again and again. Every time she looked at the camera, then at him with that strange, knowing smile. At some point, Michael lost track of how many times it had happened. 10, 20, 100? His screams had turned to whispers. His fingers clawed the floorboards. His nails were broken, his face soaked in tears and sweat. But still, it repeated, like the house had turned into a memory projector, forcing him to relive the one moment he would give anything to undo. Then something new happened. On the 30-something repetition, he wasn't sure anymore. Emily's ghostly figure turned slightly toward him before stepping off the stool, and she smiled wider, not sweetly but accusingly, mockingly, like she knew, like she had always known. "You didn't come when I knocked, Dad." The voice wasn't hers. It was a distorted, layered version of her voice, like a choir of broken mirrors speaking at once. Michael screamed, covering his ears. He staggered backward, hit the wall, and slid down, rocking, muttering. His mind cracked further with each loop. His therapist's training had long since fled. Now he was just a father, broken, trapped inside a moment that never stopped punishing him. His eyes darted across the room, and for a moment he saw a mirror in the corner. In the reflection, he saw himself. But not as he was, not now. In the mirror, he was the one on the stool, the rope around his neck. Emily stood beneath him, looking up, smiling gently. "Your turn, Dad." Michael no longer knew how many days had passed, or if they had passed at all. The clocks in the house had stopped ticking. The sunlight, when it came, bled through the windows like a false memory. His beard had grown patchy and gray. His clothes hung from his body like they belonged to a stranger. He wandered the halls barefoot, mumbling phrases that no longer made sense. Sometimes he whispered Emily's name. Sometimes he spoke as if he were her. Other times he simply stared at the photograph, the one where she hanged, and laughed. But it wasn't joy. It was the kind of laugh that people have right before they break. He had started calling himself Dad in the third person. Not Michael, just Dad. As if Michael had never existed. One rainy afternoon, or maybe night, he couldn't tell, the front door opened. A woman stood there, drenched, suitcase in hand, eyes tired and red. Her beauty had faded, or maybe just withered under guilt. It was Claire, his ex-wife. She hadn't stepped into this apartment in over 2 years. She had heard of Emily's death through a mutual friend. She hadn't even come to the funeral, but something, a dream, a scream in her head, guilt clawing at her chest, had pulled her back. As she stepped into the apartment, she was hit with a wall of silence and rot. Dust covered everything. The air was stale and heavy with something not quite death, but close. And then she saw him. Michael was sitting in Emily's room, cross-legged, barefoot, staring at the empty ceiling beam, muttering, "Don't go up there, sweetie. Dad's right here. We'll do the puzzle later, okay? Just wait." Claire gasped. She rushed to him. "Michael!" He looked up, startled, but not at her. He looked through her like she was a ghost. "Emily?" he whispered, smiling. Claire froze. Her voice cracked. "It's me, Claire. I came back." Michael tilted his head. Then slowly he backed away like a frightened child. No, you left. You left us. Emily cried for you. I told her you'd call." He grabbed his own head, rocking violently. "But you didn't. You never did." So she stopped asking. Claire fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face. I know I left. I thought she'd be better without seeing us fight every night. I didn't know it would end like this." Michael stared at her now, but the recognition was gone. Just pain. Raw and primal. "She knocked on my door. I didn't hear. Did you know that, Claire? She knocked." He laughed again, dry, shaking. "And now she knocks every night. But it's not her anymore. It's the house. It wants me to remember." Claire crawled toward him, sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. I left because I was weak. I didn't care what it would do to you two. I just wanted to escape." Michael stood, swaying like a man pulled by invisible strings. "She hanged herself," he said softly. Claire covered her mouth, trembling. Michael's eyes darted to the corner of the room. "She's doing it again. Look, watch." There was nothing there, but he saw it. And then he smiled. "I think it's my turn soon." Claire screamed. "Stop it, you're not well. Michael, listen to me." But he was already walking out of the room toward the closet. She followed him, grabbing his shoulders. "Don't you dare leave me too. Don't you dare." Michael turned. For a moment, just a second, his eyes focused, and he whispered something that made her soul freeze. "Who's Michael?" Claire didn't sleep. She couldn't. After that day, Michael had stopped eating, speaking, or responding. He wandered the apartment like a ghost, wearing the skin of a man she once loved. And every night, without fail, he returned to Emily's room. There he watched the invisible scene. There he mumbled her name over and over. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he wept, sometimes he just stared. Claire tried everything. She cooked his favorite meals. She called therapists, priests, doctors. But no one came. It was as if the house itself was unreachable. Even when she tried to leave, the door wouldn't open. The outside world no longer existed. One night, she heard him speaking in a clear voice for the first time. She ran down the hall, heart pounding. Michael stood in the middle of Emily's room, staring at the wall. A single photograph rested there, not framed, just nailed directly into the wood. It hadn't been there yesterday. The photo showed Emily hanging, face pale, lips blue, eyes open, and beside her, though faded, stood a shadow, a tall figure, hands limp at his sides. The face was blurred, but Claire knew it was Michael. Michael turned to Claire slowly and smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand now," he said. Claire took a step back. No, you don't have to." He shook his head gently as if comforting a child. "She was waiting for me all this time. I was just late." He walked to the ceiling beam. The rope had returned. Always there, coiled and waiting. Claire rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "Please stop. You don't have to do this. We can leave." Michael leaned close. His voice was calm, almost tender. "I'm not leaving her alone again." Then he looked at the photograph again and whispered, "Daddy's here, sweetie," and he stepped up. Claire screamed. She lunged, but some force threw her backward. She slammed into the wall, her vision blurred. Through tears and horror, she saw Michael, still smiling, loop the rope. He didn't tremble. He didn't hesitate. He stepped off. The body fell. The snap echoed. And then, silence. The lights flickered. The room grew cold. Claire crawled toward him, sobbing, reaching out, but the body was gone. So was the rope. So was the beam. The room was clean again, quiet, empty. Only the photograph remained. Now there were two figures, Emily and Michael, both smiling, both blurred. Claire screamed until her throat gave out, and then she sat there, alone, for hours, for days. Time meant nothing now. Sometimes she heard Emily's laugh, sometimes Michael's voice reading bedtime stories from the other room. Sometimes she heard knocking, software rhythmic, like someone asking one last time to be let in. Claire pressed her forehead to the floor and wept, over and over, until she could no longer remember who she was crying for. Because now the house was silent, and the dead were finally together.